but we're going to be talking about something rather interesting. So we're going to be talking about a real-life monster that actually is something that is historically founded and is something that to this day actually does remain a bit of a mystery. We're going to be talking about the Beast of Gevaudan. The death toll was estimated anywhere between 60 and 500 people, ranging from young children to the elderly, men, women. So before we get further into this one, I do want to say for younger viewers, just beware this live stream does cover sensitive and at times a little bit scary content. I've made sure it's as clean and not gory as possible. I won't be going into certain details, but this does involve real deaths and some rather just tragic circumstances, so we do want to respect that subject matter. So the Beast of Gevaudan was described as a large and canid-shaped creature, often compared to, but specifically stated not to be a wolf. It had traits like striped fur. Its size was nearing that of a domestic cow, and it frequently was described as having a tufted tail, which is kind of that bit of fur at the end of an animal's tail, like a lion's. The odd description has led to a lot of weird ideas about what this creature really was, and we'll go into those near the end. But we are going to cover what led to this. In the 1760s, France, where this beast was sighted and the killings occurred, was not a country at peace. Louis XV was widely seen as a pretty bad king, and the upper class and ruling class of France at the time was seen as quite awful and debaucherous by the public. And thanks to poor military choices, France had lost a lot of foreign holdings. The common people were not happy. There was a large amount of famine and plague at this time. People were starving while the rich were feasting. This is the time leading up to the French Revolution. That disparity between upper and lower class was growing to unprecedented levels at the time, and general consensus among the common people was that they were being neglected at best, and at worst, actively mistreated. This was a circumstance that in a few decades would actually boil over into one of the most violent and turbulent, if not the most violent and turbulent times in France's history. And it also led to this circumstance being pretty awful for what happens in the next couple of years in the 1760s. In the summer of 1764, the first attack by the Beast of Gevaudan happened. Gevaudan is a French province, kind of like states here in the United States. And the first victim of an attack was Marie-Jeanne Vallée, and she was tending her cattle near the forests. Her father was a shepherd and often would have his children help with his work. They were near the French town of Langon in France, and a large wolf-looking creature charged out of the forest to attack her. And luckily, though, the bulls among her cattle and was not seen by her again. So she thankfully survived the encounter with no injuries. Unfortunately, the first death was reported in a nearby grove and is widely considered to be the first actual victim of the Beast of Gevaudan. Until the year 1765, so for the next roughly 7 to 8 months, it was allowed to roam unchallenged by the French government. No military, no garrison was sent, and the peasantry was basically left to fend for themselves. This is one of the things that led to a lot of anger from the common people, because this creature was out there killing not only livestock, but people. And it was widely considered at the time no one was safe outside of a town or city in Gevaudan. This is where a lot of the speculation on how many beasts there were, what exactly it was, and how many exactly people were victims at this time is very, very unclear. This is why we get that large disparity from 60 to 500, because at this time probably a lot of attacks were being attributed to the Beast of Gevaudan, which were probably not, and we'll go into those later. Finally, near the end of the year, Captain Dumal of Clermont Prince Dragoons, a military brigade in France, and his troops were dispatched to Gevaudan, but had pretty poor relations with the local people due to a lack of cooperation and also a lack of respect he had for the common people. Multiple times, he and his troops almost caught or shot what they thought was the Beast of Gevaudan, but ultimately they were not able to catch or... these would be Jean-Charles Marc-Antoine, Vassuel de Nevel, and his son Jean-Francis, which kind of weird that they have wildly different lengths of names, but these two were professional wolf hunters, and since that was the most similar creature everyone thought the Beast of Gevaudan was, that is the experts they brought in, which is a good choice. The de Nevels believed the beast to be likely one or more wolves, not some mystery creature, and using their hounds and usual tactics for hunting wolves, they attempted to hunt the beast until basically June, until the next summer of 1765, until they were replaced by Francois 4 months. But in September of 1765, he killed a large male wolf and later a female wolf and pup, thought to be associated with that male wolf. And for roughly 3.5 months, there were no reported or attributed attacks by the Beast of Gevaudan. But unfortunately, that peace and silence on that front did not last. And in the public's eyes, the beast was still at large to them. They were not really buying that that short reprieve was going to last that long, because so many of them thought it was not a wolf. And thankfully, though, after another few years until 1767, this beast kept killing, but it was finally stopped by a hunter. Good to say that many wolves and actually even a striped hyena were killed in France at this time. So pretty much any and every predator was being hunted. So what came after was actually rather interesting. In the following decades, numerous French provinces reported similar types of attacks and killings of canid-like beasts that were hunting livestock and people. These attacks and killings never did truly resume in the province of Gevaudan, though. And smaller instances of these attacks did crop up and never got to the level of Gevaudan, but plagued France up until the French Revolution decades later. And these reports would fade into the growing civil unease and riots and revolution. So what exactly happened? This is the big thing, is there have been many hypotheses on what exactly terrorized these people for almost a little over half a decade. These range from very mundane explanations like a giant wolf, or kind of scary ones like a potential human serial killer, or the exotic, which are things like escaped foreign animals like that hyena. And some are quite outlandish and implausible, which those are ones that we are simply not going to give the time of day here, because those are somewhat disrespectful to those who did die in these attacks and these killings, to entertain the more fantastical and outlandish ones that are mostly just there because people like to talk. The first hypothesis we are going to discuss is the wolf hypothesis. The most simple one, which is that the beast was a wolf and nothing more. Whether it was a large wolf or not is not really important to this one for those who support this. Many attacks were likely not perpetrated by the individual beast that was probably thought to be the Beast of Gevaudan, but likely simply any animal attacks during this time were attributed to the Beast of Gevaudan, meaning that any wolf or dog attack was likely going to be thought to be another attack by the beast. But there are some holes in this theory. The first one is that wolves are incredibly shy in their interactions with humans. There are actually very few fatal wolf attacks, with only about 12 people in both Europe and North America being fatally attacked by wolves in the past 20 years. The attacks also lasted for a much longer duration and over a much larger range, and in too tight of a time frame to be perpetrated by typically a wolf. Wolves have very defined territories, so often won't stray into other wolves' territories, and they're typically a very common size, where they won't go too far. And these attacks in the province of Gevaudan occurred far too far away for it to be the same wolf. It would have been entering another. Wolves are group-living, pack-living animals that work together with their families to bring down their prey. They are, well, large, not nearly as large as the beast of Gevaudan was reported, and also they tend not to ever really be striped. And also the way that these animals kill their Gevaudan were quite familiar with wolves. There was actually a high wolf population at that time. They knew what a wolf was, and the beast of Gevaudan, in their eyes, was not a wolf. It would not have been such a mystery to them if it were a wolf doing this. And they were used to wolves that did grow accustomed to people, problem wolves like we do occasionally have today. And if it were one of those wolves, they would have simply identified it as a wolf and handled it as such. There are other possibilities, though. The hyena hypothesis is another popular one. Exotic, what are called menageries, which are private zoos essentially, were popular in France at this time. And unlike modern zoos, the security and way of keeping these animals in was not as good as it is today. So these animals were known to escape from time to time, and could be quite dangerous. They were animals that were in an unfamiliar habitat, so they would be scared, and also they were animals that the local wildlife and people were not used to dealing with. One of the animals that fits the beast's description a little bit better as far as coloration, while not size, is the striped hyena, and one was killed in France at the time. The coat pattern matches, the jaw forces required to do the damage on skulls that the beast of Gevaudan was doing, which was actually crushing skulls in certain attacks, is fully within a hyena's ability to do. The problem with this hypothesis, though, is that striped hyenas are not hunters. When it comes to their food, striped hyenas prefer to scavenge larger food, and if they are going to hunt, they hunt much smaller animals than themselves. So the behavior in this case does not match of the previous two, but the idea that instead of a wolf or hyena, it was a creature that we commonly would call a wolf dog, meaning it is a wolf as one parent and a dog as the other was performing the killings. And an even further elaboration on this is that the idea that it may have been specifically bred to have the odd physical traits and behavioral traits may have been trained for it. Wolf dogs are known to be quite difficult to train, though, and they are known for being quite unpredictable, as they have a amalgamation of the behavior of domestic dogs and wild wolves. They can be quite dangerous in the wrong circumstances. A big question with this one is, why would someone breed such an animal and then set it loose on their fellow French? The nobility in France saw the peasantry often as... One second, we got some people walking down here. They often saw the common people not as equals or even, in many cases, people, and they would often, the nobility, treat them as their own personal entertainment. This is a social environment that led to the long and bloody upheaval that was the French Revolution. And unfortunately, this was not, if this is the case, this was not the only case of, well, unfortunately, great mistreatment by the nobles to the common people. And this does lead us to actually to the next hypothesis, though. And this is the idea that it was a serial killer. There are many documented cases of serial killers at this time in France's history. These individuals were often wealthy or noble individuals. So we're going to go into what evidence actually goes into why this may have been a serial killer. Firstly, the duration. Almost 6 years was how long the attacks took place over. Typically, an animal doesn't do human killing attacks over that long of a time period. And the attacks also match what we know about modern-day serial killers. Which means they started far from a certain location and moved in closer. They started up here and moved their way down here chronologically. These were the last attacks. But who would match the distribution of these? So one of the more likely suspects in this is the Chastel family, because their residence is near the final killings. The difficulty with this is that the Chastels earned their fame and wealth after killing the beast. They don't fit the MO or the profile of what we would think of as the killers. So this is the big one, is the victims who survived these attacks unfortunately describe an animal, not a human, and while they described vaguely canine, they did not describe a human being. The Chastels would not have been responsible likely for this. And unfortunately, this leads to the unsatisfying conclusion that we may never know exactly what happened. Given that the body of what was declared the beast was lost in the French Revolution, we can't go back and re-examine it. The poor records at the time, and many records likely destroyed at the time, unfortunately mean we can't go back and look at first-hand records as well. But the last thing is that this was likely not simply one thing. It is likely that the killings attributed to the Beast of Gevaudan were a mixture of many of these hypotheses, a synthesis of these, where there may have been a serial killer, there may have been man-eating wolves, there may have been a hyena that did this, or a wolf dog. And unfortunately, even if we did find a conclusion to this that was definitive, that would not bring back those who died in France from 1764 to 1767. And it would not bring closure to their loved ones at the time who are now dead, nor to their descendants. So unfortunately, that is a rather unsatisfying conclusion. Before I go, happy Halloween, everyone. Be safe, but please have fun. We wanted to give you guys something to talk about a real monster in history, and this is kind of the real monster of human history. And lastly, Boo Fest is tomorrow, so please come by the Science Center from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. The admission is free. Come in costume. We got some Halloween games. We got spooky stuff for you to learn about. So this is Monday, October 31st. We will be closed. Guys, have a wonderful day. Happy Halloween.